Okay, Richard, take us into the world of science and politics.
Yep, so I'm not going to use a PowerPoint because politicians don't use PowerPoints, you probably notice. And why not? It's about me. So, first of all, it's been quite interesting actually listening to those people, hasn't it? Because I've heard a few things. I heard from Jackie about the importance of understanding who you're communicating with. Then I heard from Mark the importance of understanding yourself as the communicator. And then from Peter, some of the processes for communication. Now, communicating with politicians, of course, uses that exactly the same mix. So that's the part of the story that I'm going to tell tonight, communicating with politicians. Now, these ideas are not my own. I consulted with lots of people in Hobbitville, and they've all given me their thoughts about it. So, and of course, the study of politicians is an art in Wellington, isn't it? That's what we do. That's what we get off on. So we'll share a few of these and see how we go. I thought it might be useful to start, first of all, by looking at politicians. What are they like? And then moving on to consider why would you bother to engage with them anyway? And then finally some suggestions for how you might do this if you wanted. So, as you know, politicians come in lots of guises. You know, sometimes they're national politicians and sometimes they're local body politicians and sometimes they're very minor politicians. I thought I might concentrate on the parliamentary politicians tonight because the program said this was from kids to John Key, so I thought, well, we'll concentrate on those, but most of the messages are probably transferable. So what's the difference between the worldview of researchers and the worldview of politicians? And I think the best explanation I ever read of this said that the key emphasis of researchers is on analysis. The key emphasis of politicians is on relationships. Now that's important. You think of that the USA presidential election. All that, we heard nothing about policy. We watched those politicians build relationships with people through their advertising, through shaking, touching, holding babies, kissing them, that's right, you kiss babies, don't you, hold people, and all those other things that they do. They are continuously building relationships. And I think it's really important when you're communicating with politicians to get that. Actually, they're not that interested in the analysis. So it's also important to remember with politicians that they're not dumb, despite the fact that we like to think they are. Because in the end, you have to be quite clever to get votes. You've got to persuade people, and those of you that have been in student politics will know that. They also have to focus on a hell of a lot of things. And each day they'll be involved. I mean, politicians actually do work pretty hard, and each day they have to do lots of different things. So their worldview is one that is shallow in many things, as opposed to scientists or researchers that are going to go deep. So that's confusing to them. They focus on significant things, especially when they're in government. So you take the last 7 days, you know, Pike River, unemployment, Prince Charles. You know, it's a busy life. And they focus on the outcome, not the process. All they're interested in is what's going to result at the end, not how you get there. That is quite different from our worldview. The one thing that is similar to yours, or many of you in this room probably, is that their funding is short term. They only get 3 years, and it's temporary, and they do have to do things quickly, just like you. So, you know, have some sympathy. Having said that, individual politicians are different. You need to find out about them if you're going to have some sort of relationship with them. And it's just like Jackie. You know, if Jackie said to you, come and talk to some kids with me, the first question you'd ask was, how old are they? But when I hear people go, oh, there's politicians coming, oh, who? You need to find out about them. This then brings us to the question of engaging politicians. Why bother? In fact, actually, you know, ask most people in Auckland, should you engage with politicians, and they'll say, no way. But interestingly, Wellington is full of lobbyists, and I reckon most of those lobbyists are actually paid by Aucklanders. So actually, there is a reason for communicating with them, and that's because they can make a difference. And the times we notice when they make a difference are when they do things that pisses us off. And therefore, that's what we need to be thinking about when we're deciding whether we're going to do it or not. There's sort of 3 reasons you may want to engage. The first of them is to tell them that they're wallies and you need more money. and that's called protest. Okay? And I guess you're probably best to ask your parents' generations about that, because your parents' generation did protest very well. In fact, actually, the protest marches of the 60s and 70s were really the online dating service of their day. You know, it's probably a number of you in here, actually, the result of some of those protest marches, for the truth be known. The second thing you can do is persuade or advocate. And really, I think there's a lot of people that are very good at that, and they're called PR people, or they're called the people that run your organisations. And I think if you want to move into that space, then you've got to use those people. Advocating and persuading is a skill. And my recommendation would be not to try it on with politicians. I'd get some pretty good advice from the people in this organisation, for example. University politics being a classic example. But the one thing you can do is inform and enthuse. And so just for the next few minutes, I just thought I might talk about some of the techniques for that. Probably my most interesting reflection and observation actually is when the new government comes in and the politicians get their new portfolios. And some poor sod gets the Prime Minister going, "You've got research, science and technology." And you can just about see them go, "What? You know, it's a portfolio I know nothing about. I don't know what they're talking about. I won't be able to understand it. I have to deal with people who are intelligent, who are opinionated, and who don't care how they look in photographs. What the hell am I going to do?" But the interesting thing is that very quickly they become fascinated by it. And that is a really important message. And they become fascinated for two reasons. First of all, they realise that actually there's not many bad news stories in this portfolio as compared with education, social welfare, health. And then, even better, as the story's been told tonight, that there is actually a lot of good news stories in it. And so what we've always found is that the politicians that have got that role as the minister actually very quickly move into it, and they see opportunities. And they always are really disappointed when they finally get the boot, usually because they're not very good. So taking that into account, how can you as emerging researchers engage with the politicians? Now I'm going to talk about face-to-face interaction here because you can engage by writing letters or filling in forms or on your blog or sending them emails. To be honest, most of those get handled by officials. Whenever you send off an email or you send off a letter to the minister or whatever, they don't really see them. They'll be passed under their eye and that's about it. But as an emerging researcher, I think you've got a real good opportunity here, but it's often limited by two things: time and the opportunity that you actually get. So, as you know, politicians are very busy, time's important, and they're very good at making trade-offs, 20 minutes with you or 20 people for 1 minute. You do the maths. So the most likely opportunities you're going to get are either bump into opportunities, unplanned, just happen to randomly find a politician, or rolled out moments. Now that's what old buggers like me do all the time, because we want somebody who looks young and cheerful and knowledgeable next to us. So that's the rollout moments. Who's done the rollout moment? Nobody. One. Good. Thank God for that. And by the way, that's not to say, of course, that you shouldn't be proactive about inviting politicians, because actually it's worth a try, because they choose some pretty random sort of things to go to. So, give it a go. And as you'll see in a minute, I think that quite often they'll probably come to some of the things you're organising rather than others. So if you know they're going to meet them, then you need to do your homework on them. So how many of you have read the National Party manifesto? No, I'm going to change that question actually. How many of you have not read the National Party manifesto? There you go. Except, aren't they the government in charge of research, science and technology? So I think you need to do your homework. And I think if we go back to that concept of the relationship, I think you already have a big advantage when it comes to actually those bump into or those rolled out moments. I mean, emerging researchers are already smarter than the researchers that are there, have been for years. You're more savvy, you're more connected, you're better looking, and you're less grumpy than the others. So politicians are actually going to be quite interested in talking to you. So you've already got advantage before you start. So you've got your opportunity. It's an open day at the university. The minister's standing next to you. Here's your chance. So what are you going to say? Well, first of all, they want to hear a good news story. And I think if you've only got a very short period of time, which is usually what it is, I'd go for it. But then put the emphasis of the story on the outcomes. So that's, what does it mean for New Zealand, your research? What does it mean for Auckland? What does it mean for their portfolio? What does it mean to get them re-elected? What does it mean to make them look good in front of the Prime Minister? That's the stories they're going to want to hear. And then, finally, how can you package that message? And I think the key message, you've got to get the key message up front, because that's all they'll take away. Can you imagine how many people the Prime Minister or a senior politician speaks to in a day? So you need to get that key message up front. It's called, the takeaway, you've all heard it. And then I think you need to keep the message really simple. So one of the things the Royal Society organises is these things called the, what do we call them? The Science Speaker Series at Parliament. And we get scientists to come along and talk about things. You've done it, haven't you? No. And we sit down with them beforehand and say, keep it simple, keep it simple. And inevitably the scientists find that very challenging, because they don't want to look stupid. That's their big concern. It's about me too. And so what they do is they go in complicated. Now, what politicians are very good actually is, we did one the other day, we just got these scientists to get it so simple. Politicians are very good about getting it back up complicated again. They'll ask you the questions very quickly to get back up. That's what they're so good at. But they just want that base starting point so they can ask you the questions. If you scare them and say things that they don't understand, then they won't go back up again. So just think, all I'm doing is creating the start of a relationship. So when you first meet somebody, you don't start off by telling them, your life history. So I think that's quite important. And then I think it's quite useful actually to show by doing. I think that does work. Politicians, they quite like to see something. Of course, the other advantage you've got is the possibility of grabbing the moment. If a senior administrator from a university is striding across the room towards a politician, what's that politician thinking? Jesus, here we go again. Same story, I'm going to get whinged at for a quarter of an hour. You can leap in. Big smile, handshake. Hi, I'm Richard. I'm using the government's investment to do some really interesting research on, which I hope will result in, The chances are you'll lose your funding because the senior administrator will probably take it off you for barging in front of them, but it's worth a try. So, that's the theory. Shall we try it? So, I'm going to choose the people in that third row. Phil, come up here. So, Phil looks like the Prime Minister, doesn't he? Hey? Always thought he looked like the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister's grayed a bit quicker than you, Phil, which is always a little worry. So he's going to come to one of you people for 20 seconds. Okay? And in that 20 seconds, what do you think of David Beckham, by the way?
Yeah, okay.
She's going to come to you for 20 seconds, and what you're going to do is inform and enthuse him. Okay? And this is what Susie's going to talk about in a minute, because this is your elevator pitch. This is your 20 second. Okay? How are you feeling? A bit worried? It's an awful way. I'm not going to do it. Don't worry. But it's a good example, one, of what politicians have to put up with all the time. No, something new. No, they're better at coping it than we are, but they still find it hard. And secondly, I think it just rubs in the importance of having that elevator pitch. That 20-second speech that you can give to say what you do, and just having it, you can learn it off by heart. And being able to use it all the time, and I think Susie's going to talk about that in a minute. So I guess my elevator speech is that what you're doing is you're building a relationship. You've got to do your homework, You've got to focus on the outcomes of your research and get your takeaway message up front. Thanks very much.